From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Friday, February 21. Anthony Albanese and South Australian Premier Peter Malinauskas have unveiled a $2.4 billion package to save Whyalla Steelworks. The vast majority of that money will be used to upgrade the steel mill so it can become a major producer of green steel under a new owner. To find out what that means, go to theaustralian.com.au. Donald Trump versus Volodymyr Zelensky. An end to the US-Europe alliance in support of Ukraine. Warnings of World War III and Russian glee. That's the fast-moving situation ripping through the war in Ukraine. Today, what Donald Trump says and what he means. Cameron Stewart is The Australian's chief international correspondent, and it seems in recent days, Cam, we're seeing a dramatic shift in the war in Ukraine, or what could potentially be the peace process for the war in Ukraine. Let's go back a couple of days to a press conference Donald Trump gave at Mar-a-Lago in Florida, where he said something that he said a few times before, that this war would have never started if he had been president at the time and that he could have made a deal.
I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way.
Do you think that's right?
No, I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that that would be right, Claire. I don't think that American position on Ukraine was in any way a factor for Putin invading Ukraine at the time that he did. I think that is Trump thumping his chest to a degree and just saying, he has the art of the deal. He has said a lot of things wouldn't have happened had he been president during Joe Biden's presidency. I think that's just a bit of showmanship on Trump's part.
President Putin and I would talk about Ukraine. It was the apple of his eye, I will tell you that. But there was never a chance of him going in. And I told him, you better not go in. Don't go in. Don't go in. And he understood that. He understood it fully. But I'm only interested. I want to see if I can save maybe millions of lives. This could even end up in a World War III. I mean, to be honest with you, you've been hearing now Europe is saying, well, I think we're going to go in and we're going to go. All of a sudden, you're going to end up in World War III over something that should have never happened. And, it's a very sad situation. Yeah, please.
What do you think about that? Is there any suggestion that other European states are going to have boots on the ground, or that it's going to escalate to a wider Europe-wide conflict?
Again, I don't think there is any evidence to suggest that. I mean, the war is very, very bogged down, has been bogged down on a very defined front line for really over a year now, with only marginal changes to that front line. The Russians don't have the manpower or the resources to continue this war forever, but they have many more men and resources to continue it compared to Ukraine. There really is no suggestion, I think, that this war would expand if it kept going the way that it is.
The next thing that has happened is that Donald Trump has taken to his platform, Truth Social, and to X to make some quite remarkable claims about Volodymyr Zelensky. Here's a voice actor reading Donald Trump's words.
Think of it. A modestly successful comedian, Volodymyr Zelensky, talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that couldn't be won, that never had to start, but a war that he, without the US and Trump, will never be able to settle.
Trump said only he could successfully negotiate an end to the war with Russia.
Biden never tried. Europe has failed to bring peace, and Zelensky probably wants to keep the gravy train going. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is shattered, and millions have unnecessarily died. And so it continues.
Europe has been quite shocked by the approach the Trump administration has taken this week. It started with the Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, who said that there'd be no US troops stationed in Ukraine in any peace deal, that Ukraine could not expect to get its old borders back, in other words, the territory Russia has taken, and Ukraine could not expect to be a member of NATO after this war. Now, only a matter of days later, as you say, Trump has almost confirmed this with an extraordinary attack on Zelensky, claiming that he is a dictator without elections, which is ironic given that Putin is exactly a dictator without elections, and, teasing him as being a modestly successful comedian.
On top of this, Zelensky admits that half of the money we sent him is missing. He refuses to have elections, is very low in Ukrainian polls, and the only thing he was good at was playing Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections, Zelensky better move fast, or he is not going to have a country left.
And of course, Ukraine was locked out of the first negotiating talks between Russia and the US in Saudi Arabia. So you put all these factors together, and there is, I think, genuine alarm amongst many European nations, and of course in Ukraine, that the way that the Trump administration is going about these negotiations is initially hugely favouring Russia.
I don't want all these people killed anymore. I'm looking at people that are being killed, and they're Russian and Ukrainian people, but they're people. Doesn't matter where they're from on the whole planet. And I think I have the power to end this war.
And what does that ultimately mean for any peace deal that is struck? Does it really mean that Putin gets punished for his invasion? Does he pay any price whatsoever for his behaviour in relation to Ukraine? Or does he walk away with 20% of Ukraine, no security guarantees for Ukraine in the future, and no real punishment for Putin? That certainly is the fear that has been engendered by the events this week.
Cam, one interpretation of the way Donald Trump is speaking is that this is either the way he thinks, that he genuinely does believe that Volodymyr Zelensky is a thief and a liar and that he has ripped off the United States.
But today I heard, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
Or the other way to interpret it is that this is a big Donald Trump sound and fury dramatic moment, and it's aimed at changing Volodymyr Zelensky's expectations of what he can get from a peace process, that he would then be able to bring Zelensky to the table with an expectation that he's not going to get everything he wants. He's going to have to cede some territory. Which of those two things do you think is more likely?
Look, I think Donald Trump is definitely playing the game of being the noisy deal maker to try to get both sides to fall into line and get into a position where a deal can actually be made. I mean, he's certainly telling Ukraine that it's unrealistic to have the expectations it does have in this war, and that is to have NATO membership and to reclaim the territory it's lost in this war. And I think that Trump is correct in saying that's unrealistic for Ukraine to do this. The thing, though, is that they've said this in public rather than as a negotiating tactic behind closed doors, and that is the area where a lot of people in Europe are saying, well, hold it, that you've just given away these concessions publicly without even starting negotiations with Russia. So this only works from Trump's perspective if the Russians then give something in return. And what the Russians would have to give is an acceptance of some sort of security guarantee for Ukraine, short of NATO membership, but that would satisfy Ukraine and would satisfy Europe. And there certainly is no early sign that this will be the case. The Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov in the talks in Saudi Arabia said Russia would not agree to European troops being stationed in Ukraine as part of any peace agreement. Now, if that's the case, that's a non-starter for Europe. So what we've seen already is Trump telling Ukraine that it's going to have a lot of concessions and not getting any concessions that we're aware of from Russia. And that's very concerning, I think.
Coming up, what Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky say.
Volodymyr Zelensky responded to those claims overnight, saying Donald Trump has fallen for Russian disinformation.
We have seen this disinformation. We understand that this is coming from Russia. We understand this, and we have evidence that these numbers are being discussed between America and Russia. Unfortunately, President Trump, with who we have great respect as a leader, and the American people who support us, but unfortunately, he lives in this disinformation space.
Vladimir Putin says nobody is excluding Ukraine, that it will be included in negotiations, and has called Zelensky hysterical. Finally, came in the background to all of this is a dispute over Ukraine's rare earths. Ukraine has much of the world's sources of critical minerals that are important for things like semiconductors. US officials, according to American media, suggested to Volodymyr Zelensky that the US could be granted 50% ownership of those rare earths. And that's something that Zelensky declined. That's before this onslaught of criticism from Donald Trump. What is that?
Well, it's interesting. Trump seems to be suggesting that Ukraine owes America a great financial favour because it's been supporting its military with billions and billions of dollars over the whole 3-year war. And Trump is more or less saying, look, you owe us for what we've given you. And so that attempted deal with the rare earths was a part of Trump basically trying to get something back for the United States for what it has given the Ukraine. But of course, the Ukrainians and Zelensky said, well, we're not going to do that without security arrangements being attached to that deal. You know, if you want a good deal on rare earths, then you need to give us the security guarantees we need to proceed. And so that's why it's a non-starter with Zelensky. But I think the fact that Trump even tried this with Ukraine just shows that he really sees that Ukraine owes America for the support that it's given it over the war.
Cameron Stewart is the Australian's chief international correspondent. Thanks for joining us on The Front. For all the best journalism from Australia and the world, join our subscribers at theaustralian.com.au.